Hi everyone, it's Tuesday night, and I thought I would put another little discussion starter, as I call them, to get you going a little bit in week 4. Because there's a lot of readings and there's an underlying theme, but I just want to make sure that you nail it and that you start discussions around around really the important part of the unit, and also that you again are able to conceptualize a little bit. So I'm going to talk about theory because really, again, in a master's, that's what we're trying to provide to you, theoretical framework, so that you are able to go from describing practice all to sort of analyzing things from a wider sort of lens, particularly systems lens. So I've got a few very short slides, but things that I just want to put you on a lead, and you can follow up with your own explorations. So 3 things I want to talk to you about today. So I encourage you to start unpacking the TPAC model. If you've not looked at it yet, there is a reading specifically on TPAC, and you're going to find a ton of information online. Their website, resources, the TPAC site itself, and to see how this helps you with this reflection this week. Then I want to draw a parallel between leadership, some leadership stuff we see in leadership theories, the contingency theories in leadership, and the TPAC model, and make a suggestion to you that really the TPAC model fits within that. It's actually a contingency theory in terms of leadership in technology, and also provide you another theoretical lens that's slightly different, but look at Brenner's ecological model and see how it might be relevant in the model of discussion for this week. Okay, so the TPAC, what is it? So I'm going to let you explore this. There's a journal article on the reading list, and also you are going to find a ton of information on it. I just inserted a sort of an image so that we can do a visual description. And as you see, the premise of TPAC is fairly straightforward. It really is interesting because it broke away from the early literature on technology, when we really just looked at the teacher and technology as being sort of dyad, being two entities within this relationship of integration. And it started looking at a triad instead. And the 3 elements in the triad are pedagogical knowledge, content knowledge, and technological knowledge. So actually saying, well, if you want true integration, you have to find this happy place where the educator or the teacher is able to find an area of competency there that actually sort of overrides all 3 spheres of their sort of job satisfaction and job expertise. So what they know technologically, what they know in terms of content, and what they know in pedagogical knowledge. So this is interesting because it now no longer is just the teacher and the tech, but it's also contextual. It's about how long the teacher has been there, how integrated are they within a unit, how sort of focused are they on certain pedagogical goals within that. And so it becomes interesting to look at tech not just at this novelty which is inserted, but to actually look at this in a wider context. So why is it interesting for us this week? But I think if you start looking at the TPAC model, you'll realize it's the first model I started looking at integration of technology in schools in terms of context. And in this unit, we are looking at the stakeholders. So we're looking at context. We're looking at this as being a complex, multi-stakeholder sort of process. And the first step in doing this is to realize that teachers are not, it's just not one teacher and the tech they're trying to integrate, but it's actually a sort of matrix already around them about, you know, what's their background, what are their qualifications, what are their pedagogical aims, what's their expertise, how long have they been in a job, how supported are they in the job. So you start having a little bit of a feel for context when you look at TPAC, and it starts being interesting for us when we look at technological integration, because now it's not simply a linear process, and this starts to make a lot more sense. What I'm going to suggest to you, because I'd like to make some links back to leadership theory since you're on the leadership program, is you probably remember 501. I assume you've been introduced to the sort of typologies of leadership, and there's a lot of types of leadership theories, but we try and classify them. And often the way we look at them, we look at trait theories, which are looking at how we see leadership or define leadership as being inherent qualities of the leader. Then you have behavioral theories, and they're the ones that you've already seen, I'm sure: democratic, autocratic, laissez-faire, and bureaucratic. And these are really about what the leaders actually does or decides to do. Contingency theories are the third categories, and then you have influence theories. But contingency theories are theories that look at how does the situation influence good leadership. So they're the first, sort of historically, the first set of leadership theories that actually look at context and say, actually, it's not just about a leader and people they supervise, but it's also about looking at context. So within contingency theories, you have several. I've listed 4 there: path goal, field Deleuze, leadership process theory, and situational leadership. But the one I'm going to suggest you look at, if you have time, is the path goal theory, and perhaps situational leadership as well. Don't get too drowned in it, but have a little look, right? I've given you a quote there, which is, unlike other leadership theories, such as trait theories, behavioral theories, contingency theory focus not on the leader's ability to start, but on the various situations which leaders may find themselves in. So that's why it's interesting for us, because again, it's contextual. When you start looking at contingency theories, you're starting to look at a complex landscape. And I would argue that that's what we have in technology: a complex landscape with many stakeholders, as we are seeing in this unit. The main idea, just to carry on with the quote, the main idea behind contingency theories is that different situations will demand different style of leadership. In other words, the best leadership style is contingent on the situation. So again, I would argue that that's exactly what we're dealing with in technology integration, and that in fact TPAC, if you really dismantle it and look at it from a leadership perspective, is actually a path goal theory, because really it's looking at not integration and how to lead people in integrating technology in this classroom, but it's actually looking at what is their motivation, their expertise, what's their frame of mind as they're doing this, and what are the things that are influencing them within the task of integrating technology. That's the elements of pedagogical competence, and you go back to their content knowledge, the 2 areas that are not just about the technology. In particular, if you want to look at path goal theories, for example, path goal theory encourages leaders to consider specific tasks being targeted, not just leadership in a bubble, but within a specific task. For us here, it would be technology integration and the variables that will impact the motivation of the employee. So it's trying to put themselves in the head of the employee and try to think, what is it that's actually going to motivate them to go through this process that we're asking them? So if you look at this in terms of technology, that's really very much what TPAC model does. We have another contingency theory called situational leadership, which is also interesting and also very close to the TPAC approach. And situational leadership advocates for considering the task at hand. Here would be technology integration. And it coined this term task readiness of the employee. And I would argue, again, if you consider what they call task readiness, for us, for teachers in the sphere of technology integration, task readiness would really be, again, these 3 elements: so technological knowledge, how comfortable are they with technology; pedagogical knowledge, how comfortable are they with aligning this integration with the intentions that they have in terms of pedagogy and theory; and also the content knowledge, what expertise do they have, what how long have they been in the profession, how comfortable are they with their subject matter. And that would, all 3 would define that task readiness. And I would argue that if you look at situational theory, the middle happy zone here that TPAC defines is actually the optimal task readiness of the employee as they embark on this process. And situational theory would tell you that you have to change leadership styles in terms of integration depending on how far in the edges you are. That whether if you have someone who has very little technological knowledge, but a lot of the other 2, you would try a certain type of leadership. Same if you had technological knowledge and content knowledge, but no pedagogical knowledge. And so that your leadership style as a leader would have to adapt depending on where exactly your employee is situated on this matrix of 3 areas. So I hope this gets you to explore this a little bit. Don't get too lost in it, too drowned, but to remind you that this exists, and you have to link this with leadership theory. The other one, and this is separate from what I described above, another theoretical lens that I think is interesting within Unit 4, as we're starting to look at technology integration as a complex landscape, and we're looking at all of the different sort of stakeholders in this landscape, is to go back to Bronfenbrenner's ecological model and to see how we could apply this in management of change in organizations. So for those of you who've never encountered Bronfenbrenner, you should go and read a few articles. It's not going to be wasted time. Bronfenbrenner is a psychologist, social psychologist, and he came up with this theory, which we have summarized there in the graph. And his great assertion was that when we see behavior in a classroom, we see behavior of a child. This was particularly potent and helpful in my area in challenging behaviors. So that when we see a child misbehaving badly or really, sort of erupting in class, we should step away and actually understand that that manifestation is just the tip of the iceberg, and that actually what we see is not necessarily a conscious decision of the child to behave in a certain way, but it's really the interaction of different systems around the child. And this is what led him to sort of graphically represent his theory in this way. So he gives the system very specific names, and basically the microsystems are the systems that are very close to the child, so family, the one teacher, maybe brothers and sisters. And then as you go, you widen out, mesosystems would be the whole classroom, the whole school, the whole neighborhood. These systems interact as well. So the microsystem interacts with the mesosystem. Exosystem starts being, the city and your cultural community, and maybe your provincial sort of legislative and policy frameworks, all the things that interact to, and then they go like this all the way out. And chronosystems wasn't actually included by Bronfenbrenner, and that's the time itself as being a system that actually influences people as well, and the passing of time, and that was added afterwards by later theorists. So people often use this in terms of child psychology, but they forget that actually Bronfenbrenner is just a social psychologist, and he actually encourages us to use the same graph to think about anyone's behavior. So yourself as a teacher or yourself as an employee, you could also put yourself in the middle and understand your behavior as being a cumulative interplay of multiple systems that are around you, and that you need to analyze and break down to actually see and be able to understand the complexity of certain phenomena that we see. So this has been used extensively in schools, particularly in challenging behavior, in bullying, in understanding complex interactive processes in school, and seeing them not just as a conscious sort of intentional sort of demonstration of feelings, but rather as complex interplay of multiple systems between people and people's systems. And that's been really useful in schools, but now we're starting to use it in schools and in educational institutions to understand other things and to understand process of change generally. So staying in the middle there, no longer a child or an individual, but actually seeing an employee, or sometimes even seeing a unit. So if a unit is involved in change, for example, it could be the leadership unit in the middle, and trying to see what are the things that hinder or facilitate the process of change, depending on all of the systems that you're able to sort of analyze or identify, and that impact the unit or the person, and that also interact within each other. So for us, I would argue that Bronfenbrenner's model is very interesting in technology, because if you are seeing here either yourself as a leader trying to promote technological change, or you're picturing in the middle a teacher who you might be supervising as a person involved in the process of change and technological integration, we are going to have to consider the multiple complex systems around them and how they interact together. And my point would be that this is a convenient lens for this week in week 4, because we are encouraging you through the readings to consider the multiple stakeholders first. So we've said parents, community itself, technological companies, NGOs that are actually involved in promotional technological tools, policy and policy systems at provincial or at wider level, disability advocates and disability civil rights movement as a stakeholder itself. All of these systems are interacting in how we relate to technology and how we are sort of ready to integrate it, and how we lead this process of management change successfully or unsuccessfully. And ecological theory might enable you to get a good sort of overview of the complexity of the system. Of course, the problem with Bronfenbrenner's ecological theory, it's also criticized by many who try to use it because it never gives you a solution. it really is a lens that makes you understand the complexity of what you're involved in, and actually enables you to start to understand the different stakeholders and different systems that are around and actually having an impact on whatever phenomena you're looking at. It's not going to give you a clear sort of solution-orientated analysis, but it is going to open your eyes wide and make you understand how complex things are, and particularly if things fail or if they have problems getting to a successful outcome, it does enable you to start understanding why and things that you have to look at, even if it doesn't necessarily offer you the solution. I've given you a couple of references there, but just in passing, because you've got plenty of reading already. But if later on you want to explore, you've got an article there on PathCall, and you've got a couple of articles that are starting to demonstrate how Bronson-Brenner's ecological theory is being used in management, and particularly within organization, and in one of these cases within a school environment. So I hope this sort of triggers some thoughts and sparks a few conversations and maybe gets you to explore a few things. But I think theory is very important in master level courses. So you do at this stage have to start making connections and with things that maybe you've already seen or you're beginning to see, and start to step away and look at things from from a theoretical lens. And here you have two models that are going to help you. TPAC we're going to come back to, and ecological model we'll come back to, because the unit 4 is looking at leadership. And obviously when we look at leadership, we'll come back to this analysis that we're doing this week at looking at, but what are the systems and who are the stakeholders that might be impacting us, and then looking at how we can sort of offer in unit 4 models forward for technological integration within a leadership context, and those two framework will be useful again. So it's not wasted time, it's models that we'll come back to in unit 4. Okay, I'm going to stop there and post this now, so you have something for this week, and I will speak to you during the pub night on Thursday. Okay, have a good night.